Hey, David.
We are live, Mark. Back
Awesome.
part two of Build with AI. Welcome.
And we're at it again.
Yes. Uh, what are you drinking?
Drinking this Waterloo watermelon.
Sparkling water?
Sparkling, yes.
Nice.
Exactly. It's like the off-brand LaCroix, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
better. I don't know. They're all the same, but
Yeah, no, I think it's refreshing to drink sparkling water from
Mhm.
flavored ones. Um, I've got my big
Ah,
water bottle and I added some collagen in it.
ooh,
And
healthy.
a little bit of a biohacking streak these days, you know?
That's cool.
Yeah. Do you do anything like biohacking practices?
Um, I take AG1 by Athletic Greens
Yeah.
and a little bit of protein and fiber in a shake too, and um, actually, I fasted yesterday, so I guess
There you go.
I was gonna do 72 hours, but it was a little bit intense with kids, so I made it 36 hours. Um, so I guess that's biohacking, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, you're fasting, so that's you're putting your body through some stress.
Yeah, I like to experiment with those things, and especially
Yeah.
with sleep. I wear my Whoop watch and I check my heart rate variation, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So does it give you like the states of your sleep, REM versus deep sleep and all of
Yeah,
that? Okay.
yeah, it has those stats, and the
Yeah.
main thing it does is a recovery score, so you can see um, kind of how your body is
Yeah.
feeling. And it's like I don't actually decide how I feel in the morning until I check my score, which I don't know if that's good or bad, but I feel like it's the best indicator.
No, I mean, like sleep's got such a impact on the energy throughout your day, right? I am optimizing for that also. So, like, do you do cold plunges at all, like, or cold showers or anything like that?
I've dabbled. Yeah, I've taken some cold baths. I've put
Yeah,
some ice in there before. They're pretty neat.
yeah,
It's really hard for me to turn something into like an actual habit, though.
yeah.
So
Fair enough. You know, I mean, you keep doing experimenting something, and then something sticks. That's how I
yeah,
for me, like the cold shower and the cold plunges, I've been able to make that a habit. So
that's
it's,
cool.
yeah, every day.
You like start each morning or do an afternoon cold plunge or
Yeah, no, in the morning, the first thing, like I wake up at 5:30 and boom, I just go to the bathroom and take a cold shower I started off with 10 seconds and then slowly, I
oh
mean, Wim Hof talks about it, but slowly now I'm able to do up to 2 minutes, on a
like
good day, or 90 seconds to 2 minutes is what I do. You
like
know,
atomic habit style. You just I
Ye-
got wet. Step on I showed up.
Stair
Let's
step your way to get there.
I like
Uh,
to try if I do a cold bath, I'm in there for 8 minutes and I'm like I
that's a lot.
really I really like this idea of pushing through like the hard part because things evolve and change. And so like you get to like 5 minutes, you're like, oh, I'm not screaming inside anymore. Like I'm fine. I'm okay. And that's
It's
not
that
enough.
initial 10 seconds or 20 seconds where you're breathing hard, which is
Mhm.
the best part, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that's what's giving you the dopamine, you
Mhm.
know, sustenance and rush,
The,
so
the more shock, the better.
that's right. Yeah, it's great. And then I also, right after that, like I go like the sun right now, sunrise, since it's not daylight savings yet, but it's like 6:27 this morning. So I
Mhm.
try to go right before the sunrise, and as the sun is coming up, I'm trying to look at that with my eyes, and trying to
Yeah. Yeah.
so that's like almost one thing I realized with those two practices, at least for me, is I have sustained energy till at least 4 p.m. or like 5 p.m. Like it's pretty sustained. Like I don't even if I take a, have a heavy lunch or whatever, I don't feel groggy or sleepy. Like it's very interesting, like how these small tweaks that you can make a huge difference.
That's great. Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome, man. We're gonna get into more details of AI today, and continue the conversation from part one. And maybe we'll dive into some deeper concepts this time. How about that? Does that sound
Yeah,
good?
let's go super deep.
Right. But we'll still try to break down stuff. Like maybe I'll kind of play I'll be curious and ask some questions so you can kind of
Okay.
indulge me in answering some of those questions, like I'll be the novice. um, so let's talk a little bit about optimization. We'll start there. I mean, first let's define optimization and what is the necessity for it you know
Yeah. Um, it's interesting because there's so many angles to this. Of course, it's a broad area.
Mhm.
Um, there's people working on the hardware side. I think a lot of people saw Grok recently, and
Yeah.
they've got this really cool hardware that can compute tokens blazingly fast, and presumably more efficiently, right? Because and there's a need for this, right, across the full stack. I think not just the low level of the hardware. That's happening. That's great. I don't know that much about it,
Mhm.
um, but at, I suppose, the model selection layer, or where you're training and choosing a model and seeing what you can get to do the job to be done.
Mhm.
Um, there's a need for this because researchers scaled up compute
Yeah.
a ton, right?
Mhm.
They're
Mhm.
like, and people are saying, oh, there's emergent behaviors, which is kind of just a terminology thing. It's not something magical that's happening, but like they're seeing the models be more capable
Yeah.
by scaling up the compute on the
Mhm.
training and the size of the model. And so we have these huge models that are sort of ridiculous to
Yeah.
run,
Yeah.
like the Falcon 180 billion open source model.
Mhm.
Um, like, who can run that? Who has a GPU that can run that? Um,
Right.
and even if you're just kind of like getting, okay, great, you can get a big GPU and you can run
Yeah.
it. Congratulations. If you're just if you're going to use that model for the same repetitive task over and over and over again,
Mhm.
like, but you're choosing a model that has all these parameters that's been trained on everything and anything and everything, like you could fine tune a smaller model that can do the job, and then maybe you could run like 10 times more computations on that same GPU, right?
Yeah.
So I think that we're in this phase where everyone's really excited about the big models and finding use cases with them and sort of like prototyping time.
Mhm.
And then once people settle into, okay, this is where it's going to add value for the organization,
Mhm.
I expect more people to be fine tuning models um,
Yeah.
for a lot of that optimization. There's also, of course, just trying to get the quality too, because you have to prove the quality before you can try to optimize for efficiency and that type of thing.
Yeah. I think for me, the way I understand it is quality and the objective of what you're trying to do, right? You do want it to respond a little more creatively if you're asking it to write some sort of a poetry or some sort of a like a prose or a literature, versus obviously asking for facts is the worst way to use an LLM. But but if you want it to be a little more, let's say, summarization of a book or something like that, that's more to me, that it could be fine-tuned a little bit more for sort of like accuracy and staying within it, unless. And then there are other areas such as perhaps more like factual information pulling from various documents. Then you want to make sure, like a chat app or something like that, then you really want to, pull from that type of thing and being able to consolidate that data. So and that's why I think the objective is important when you want to optimize. It's like, what are you optimizing for? Like, how lenient do you want the optimization to be? So, like I said, it's a bad tool for fact based questions, but like, if you, and that really, that you shouldn't be using Gen AI for that. Like, really, that you have other traditional databases for those type of factual questions. And so
Yeah, I mean, LLMs are really good at analyzing facts within the context window. So if you can pull sources and provide them in the prompt, then that's been a promising avenue. There's also been interesting work done on looking at the confidence level of the LLM for a given sentence.
yeah,
And if it's like low confidence, then
yeah,
kind of revisit that particular part. And if it's high confidence, like move on. Because every token has probabilities associated with it. So you can kind of look at like, well, how sure was it of this, fact that it's giving us? And if it's low, it's like, we better double check it. And that's like an add-on to retrieval augmented generation, or RAG workflow that people are working on. So there's a lot of creativity happening in the research community.
Do a sidebar on RAG, because some folks who might be listening to this might be sort of like, kind of trying to understand things. Before we go into optimizations techniques, maybe we'll do a brief chat on what is RAG.
Yeah. So we work with instruction tuned or conversational LLM models, or just LLMs, by giving it a prompt, right? And it's really good at working with information that we give it in the prompt. So few shot learning can often improve performance. That's where you give it examples. So you're giving it instructions, but you're also giving it examples of inputs and outputs that it might be able to generalize to whatever you're asking about specifically now. And so RAG is just adding things into the prompt that you retrieved through another means. So let's say a user comes in with a question. Instead of just passing that directly to the LLM with your prompt, you do this quick side lookup. Well, maybe it's not quick, but you do a lookup on the side to, and a good example is a database system. And there's AI that can be involved in this process because there's a thing called embeddings. And embeddings are so fundamental to large language models, well, multimodal models too. But the embeddings are the mathematical representation of your text. And when you have a mathematical representation, that means they're numbers. So now you have your text represented in a list of numbers, which like a vector, which is a list of numbers. So don't overthink it. And you can compare like one set of numbers to another set of numbers to find ones that are related. So you can take this question that the user wrote in and either directly create an embedding and then find relevant documents or chunks of text in your database that you've presumably organized in some useful way to be able to do this task. And you can find related ones and then pull it in and then insert them into the prompt. So you're basically saying like, here's the user question. Here's some information that might be related. Based on the available information, try to answer the question. And that's kind of RAG in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. Sort of like a couple of things I want to pull from there. Number one, it's sort of like a way to um, augment your private data with, and then use LLM to sort of synthesize that data.
Mhm.
Um, and then number two, you talked a little bit about embeddings. And actually, there might be three things. One is sort of like prompt, in the prompt itself, like you are providing some context. And then the third thing is sort of like the embeddings that you're talking about is how similar are these words in a given context. And like that's where you kind of like, okay, these group of sentences and words are, they belong together, versus these things are more like, if you had a document and if you were to scan the document, our human mind sort of like, oh, this is more training related, this is more customer support related, like we're able to categorize the document and group the
Mhm.
text that we see. Sort of, I mean, that's really what the job of an embedding is sort of doing. And adding certain numerical representations to say this means this, and then you can compare those numerical values to retrieve based on how close the user's question or query is, right?
Yeah, it's looking at like thousands of different attributes and comparing them all simultaneously. And some of these are attributes that we probably couldn't assign human meaning to, and some of them are probably meaningless. But um, the important ones, it's getting better
Yeah.
at being aligned to like what's significant to humans. You can also like there's off the shelf embeddings models like OpenAI offers these, and you just submit some text and you get the uh, the embedding back. And
Yeah.
but you can also fine tune open source ones, and it's interesting because the way you do that is you give it examples of um, like similar and different text. So you can fine tune an embeddings model on your domain to care about the things you care about,
Mhm.
and say like, hey, these two are really different and these two are really close.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about, now that we've kind of covered RAG, sort of like the definition of it. Maybe we'll start with the lowest of the optimization techniques and build up to the what's the ultimate, right? So, yeah, how about we start with the easiest and the quickest one possible?
The quickest one possible is probably just choosing like the minimum viable model that can do your task. Um, GPT-4 is really expensive. Um, they just came out with Claude 3, but we saw Mistral 7B was outperforming Llama 2 13B, or at least matching performance there. So we keep seeing smaller models that can be a little more performant. Um, and it depends on your task also in terms of which models you can select, because um, like a lot of the models haven't been trained on much other than English, which is unfortunately pretty limiting to a lot of the world. They can do some stuff in other languages, but they're not necessarily trained to be super proficient in those. So, if you have a requirement that this has to be able to handle every language or these X number of languages, and you're kind of limited in your model choices at the moment. Um, but yeah, I mean, so much of the focus is on chatbots, but I see a future where um, AI can make like no or go or no go decisions.
Yeah.
It can classify and tag content, extract content, um, you know, uh, rank things, prioritize things. All of these are extremely useful and take a lot of time and brain energy for humans to do, but can be done by pretty small models blazingly fast. Um, and I just think that there's going to be so much of that in addition to chatbots. I mean, chatbots have their place, and they're going to replace a lot of support jobs
Yeah.
first of all.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
let's talk a little bit about, we talked about prompt engineering, we talked about RAG. I think we should also cover fine tuning the models itself, the LLMs, as another technique.
yes.
Can we talk about that?
Yeah. So fine tuning is an extension of the training process, and you can do it at various stages. So the first model that gets trained for any foundation model is generally not, you're not able to talk to it. You tell it some text and it'll kind of auto complete it or go off like it's having a daydream based on what you just told it. And it's not intuitive to work with at all. And I think that's where prompt engineering as a term came from, because you really had to engineer a prompt to actually get it to do what you needed to do. Like you had to trick it basically into doing your task with the prompt. But then they get the fine tuning starts here, and we do instruction tuning, and so we start giving it examples of inquiries, and then how we want it to respond to those inquiries. And then all of a sudden, all of this knowledge it learned in the training process, you can interact with it in a like conversational way, which I think is incredible. Like, I think that's what allowed us to have ChatGPT, is that kind of discovery that you can shift it from just being this knowledge that we can't access to being like, oh, I can talk to it. And somehow now it's like generalizing this and applying it. And so after we have this model you can talk to, or before, because you can do fine tuning at any point, you can then fine tune it on more specific sets of, I call them user inquiries, but let's just call them inputs. And then the outputs as well. And you can use this in conjunction with prompt engineering. So you could provide it examples of like support tickets, inquiries, like, help, I'm having an issue with this product, or I need a refund on this, I need to exchange this, these types of support issues. And you can kind of have a common format on all the examples and send them in. And then you want it to give back something really specific. So you could train your own Q&A bot, like just one issue in and then one answer back, like the first response of a chat bot. Or you could train it to, by giving examples for outputs of a specific category, to rank them of like high, medium, low. And then all of a sudden, once you're done fine tuning it, anytime you send that input in, whether you provide it instructions or not, now you're getting back those categories. And so you've like shifted its parameters to be customized to your specific task. And you can almost teach it like, we talked about intuition last time.
Yes.
But the model kind of learns intuition from your examples for your specific use case.
Yeah.
And by doing this, you can often get better performance. It's like if you're using few shot learning in the prompt, imagine taking those few shot examples out of the prompt, putting it into a training data set, running the fine tune. Now you have a new model, right? This model is, it has a lineage of this foundation model, but now it's your own new model that you fine tuned. And it's going to do better at your task typically, as long as your data is high quality.
Yeah.
And then oftentimes you can then test that data set on different models, and oftentimes a smaller model will also be able to perform just as well, or hopefully within your expectations.
Yeah, and I want to, we talked a little bit about different types of different techniques. Can we talk about when we want to use which technique? It's not like one is better than the other. I think it's more an application type question, right? Like, when do you apply which technique? sort of so maybe let's talk about that, right?
Yeah. So I think prompt engineering is great for prototyping, like just to make a proof of concept to show, oh yeah, the model can either do this or get in the range. Um, and for some tasks, like I think that's might be where you stop. If it's a one-off task, you don't want to spend a lot of time on it. You're just going to process maybe a small amount of data. Great. If it works, it works. And then RAG is really good for accessing your proprietary data in a useful way. Like even not proprietary, like if you have a help center and you have a bunch of documentation and you want to get you want the model to be able to use that in its answers, RAG is good for that. And then fine tuning is it really shines not so much at learning facts. So this is a misconception, is that people think that if you fine tune a model, you can just teach it your stuff. Like I'll take that help center and I'll fine tune on it and it'll know that. Well, the thing is that the pre-training of a model is so massive. That's where it learns most of its information. But fine tuning is amazingly effective at changing the style and the tone and the formatting. So if you can shave off a lot of tokens by fine tuning the model, because you don't have to include, like you can include a long instructional prompt in every example and then include that when you're doing inference, but you don't have to. And a lot of times the goal might be to shorten your prompt so you can save on tokens and use a smaller model, and you get it in the format that you want. So you can achieve that to some extent with prompt engineering. You can say like, give this back to me in JSON, or format it in a list, start every dashes or whatever. But with fine tuning, you're getting more assurance of that. There's also I think a really interesting safety aspect to fine tuning. So a lot of people try to solve safety issues in the prompt, like no matter what the user says, don't give them the instructions or something. And it's just better if you show the model by example to handle those edge cases of like, okay, the user comes in saying this prompt injection attack or whatever that we've seen floating around that people are trying on YouTube. And as a model, I want you to just either like don't do anything or say like, I'm not going to fall for your tricks. Whatever you want it to do, you show it by example. And then when some kind of a thing comes in like that, the model has been trained to ignore it. And I just think that that's just a more foolproof way to deal with these things in the long term.
Yeah, and I mean, another use case for fine tuning is also like a domain, like healthcare versus finance type. Perhaps it makes there's a certain vocabulary that these guys use, right? Like in each of these domains. I wonder, maybe fine tuning there could be more beneficial. What do you think?
I honestly don't know how much the fine tuning helps with domains. I imagine there's ways to get benefit out of it there. And I know
Yeah.
Google released a finance model. It's funny because they had MedPalm 2, and then the people at Microsoft were trying to show that GPT-4 could beat MedPalm 2, like with just prompting. And so it's like this fine tuning versus prompting war, which I think is silly because the Microsoft researchers, like, it's like you could fine tune GPT-4 too, and maybe it would be even better, but they don't test that. So yeah, it shouldn't be fine tuning versus prompting.
Right.
But I think there's potential there. I just haven't personally read any strong evidence or applications yet. But there's so much potential everywhere. So
yeah. Let's talk a little bit about updating models. with new data. Obviously, if it's for a company like a large enterprise, they are constantly, there's data updates that are happening. What are some methodologies for updating private data?
Well, that's another benefit of RAG that I should have mentioned is that if you're pulling these things from a database in real time, you can also be adding things to the database in real time. So you could have a database like a Twitter. I'm sure they're using RAG with their AI. What's it called? Is it Grok? It's also Grok. Okay, that's why I got confused. I'm like, why is it? It couldn't be Grok. I just talked about Grok. That's not Grok. I'm sure they're doing that. They have all the tweets in real time, and so they can pull tweets that are relevant, and they can give them to the LLM in the prompt. So you can imagine that with like news articles. If somebody has real-time access to a news database, then you could have an LLM. Well, it's actually, you'd have an application or a system that includes an LLM as part of it, where you could interact and you could say, what is happening right now in the Middle East? And it would pull the latest news articles and it could summarize it. I'm sure this probably exists, but that access to real-time information, RAG is really good for it. Fine-tuning, there's probably ways to do it on the fly. I think there's work going on with this. But I don't know of as many examples yet in practice.
Well, like the way I think about this is like there are different stages, right? So you sort of have that ingestion, phase of, chunking data and storing it, structuring it the way, and then you're creating the embeddings, and then you have it's almost like a two-phase approach, right? One is sort of like that ingestion and store, and then the second is sort of like the retrieval phase, like which includes both the query and the synthesis of the presentation. I think you sort of can update private data at both layers. It's just the mechanisms are different. In the ingestion phase, obviously you can talk about how you chunk the data, and there are different techniques for it, versus on the retrieval, which is kind of what you just talked about, which is an interesting, like you can obviously pull data and real time, right?
Yeah. And you can chunk data and add it in real time too. You'd obviously just need some kind of a starting database.
Yeah, I'm curious, like how long does that process take? Like is there, like, obviously you want to test everything that you've, like let's say you've chunked and you created embeddings. Like what's a typical life cycle, duration for that phase?
I think it would depend so much on your team and your use case and the data and how much it's changing and the sensitivity of it. I don't think that most RAG workflows ever stop and like development. That's what my gut tells me. I don't actually have anything to prove that, but there's this misconception about software in general among the general population that like I've heard people that want to build an app or create a business like, well, if I figured out how much it would cost to build the app and then I build it, then I could just keep making money off of it. I'm like, having ran a software company, I'm like, no, you're always paying developers. Like it does not stop. You're updating dependencies. You are like fixing bugs, adding features. And I think that what I've heard, at least for a lot of RAG workflows, is that it's pretty easy to get the first 90% working pretty well. But that last 10% of, does it retrieve the right stuff all the time? Does it produce good answers all the time? it's really hard. And you start adding a bunch of little steps. Like we talked about chunking text. So imagine you have a book, and it's like probably the first thing you try if you want to just start with the easiest thing is just like, okay, every 500 characters, we'll just cut it off, and we'll have a database. It'll hold 500 characters in each row. It's like, well, now you're cutting it mid-sentence. Like, okay, so what's a logical separation? Well, let's do it by paragraph, right? Or 5 paragraphs, because the average paragraph length in this book is this long. We do 5 paragraphs. And it's like, well, you cut it. This one cuts off pretty awkwardly in the middle of an important scene in the book. So what are the logical separations that you could retrieve a block of or chunk of text and it's meaningful and it has all the information you need? And that's a whole problem on its own. You could do it by chapter. All of a sudden your chunks are getting really big. This is where large context windows help if you want to shell out the compute to handle them. Maybe it'll get more efficient, and we can just give it the whole book, right? Brute force. Just take the whole book and give me the answer. If we could do that cheaply, great. Problem solved. We'll just, oh wait, no. So that's like dumping the whole database in the prompt every time we want to answer a question. Oh wait, that's gigabytes. It's like the file transfer alone. So you just start to run into the details of, well, what is information? I think it makes us think really hard about like, I like it because it makes me think really hard about like pretty deep topics and like how we understand things and what is a meaningful section of text. And
let's talk a little bit about what you were talking about. Kind of you were alluding to earlier, like who's on the team depends on what we're trying to accomplish. You and I kind of come a little bit from the software development background, especially mobile apps. You kind of have, depending on whether it's a native app or a hybrid, if you're using React Native or Flutter or something like that, then you just need like a one developer that can do both iOS and Android. But otherwise, you would just do iOS developer, Android developer, and then there's like a backend developer, potentially maybe a database person who is modeling the database, and and then maybe like an infrastructure, like a DevOps person, right? And then you have like a Scrum project manager managing this team. So that's kind of like a pod, as you would call it, like in our software development world. What are sort of like the equivalent AI teams, like who's involved? Let's talk about that.
I have no idea. I know that like from the software background, I see companies hiring like they're going to, like an AI startup. I'm going to start an AI startup, so I need to hire some Python developers.
Right.
And I just think that is probably a fallacy. Yeah. And from what we've seen in software over the last 3 decades, is that how we get to results and how we accelerate the pace of development is by building abstraction layers.
Yes.
And so I think it's very important to decide what level of abstraction you're going to work on. Like, do you really want to build this from the ground up using Python and like low level code? Because there's a lot of people working on that, and there's a lot of people working on the GPUs and the the inference stack. And there's startups and good solutions that are offering like inference through APIs. Or self-hosting. They're coming up with solutions for it. And there's also going to be like, I'm sure ML models that can run on your phone at some point, which will be a whole nother, like, are we going to do this locally or in the cloud? That'll be an exciting question, as the hardware develops. But like Python is not, in my opinion, the best solution for a cloud platform. So like, are you building a cloud? Are you really building an AI solution like that needs to directly configure models, or are you building more of a traditional cloud platform that's going to use some AI? And I think probably most companies, it's the latter.
Yeah.
And so you should have really good, you should have really good cloud people.
Yeah, I mean, and cloud, especially like cloud providers like AWS, is offering a lot of pre-built components like SageMaker, and that can tap into LLMs. Like I think SageMaker pulls from Hugging Face. There are so many advantages to, like, obviously on-prem is probably the least you know favorite way to do this,
Yeah.
but I think yes, like I can see that infrastructure person being heavy on the cloud side. I also think somebody who's sort of like a data expert. When we are talking about multimodal data, like it's not just text. It could also be images and other things. So uh, I don't even know if there is such a, like, a data expert or some sort of a, like, what would the job description look like, like uh,
Yeah.
somebody who's familiar with all type of data structures, right? I mean, it's like JSON and like structured, unstructured, video, voice, text, and to be able to
Yeah,
ingest.
we need, like, there's obviously labelers. You could be a
Yes,
labeler, but that's like a low level.
that's a low level.
Well,
I
you can
know of
think of it as low
folks.
level.
When I say low level, I know people outsource that most of the time. Like,
Right. That might change. I mean, I think that there's going to be a push toward really, really high quality. And so there might be some well-paid data labelers, like subject matter experts who can get really, really good quality results, because that's how we're going to push some of the quality of the outputs is really good data. Of course, LLMs are being used for data labeling now too. But yeah, I know what you're saying. It's like, what is the title for like a data visionary? This
yes,
person who's like,
data
okay,
czar or somebody.
I see the silos. I see this is what we're going to put in. This is what we're going to get out.
That's
Like,
right.
because
If
that
you
is
want
a,
to call it a data architect, for lack of a better word, that might be the word.
yeah, basically. I mean, that sounds on point.
Yeah.
That's a skill that a lot more people are going to need to learn, I think.
Yes. Yeah. And I think, like, let's talk a little bit about careers, right? I mean, like, that's when you're talking about that type of a skill set, like, like, I come from you and I come from software development, obviously. So, like, people are so used to, like, relational databases, and and then obviously the databases like MongoDB came in, and now you're dealing with a little bit of, I mean, they call it unstructured data, but it's still like JSON style documents, but now you sort of have to expand your horizon and skill set to include these other data types. So from a career standpoint, you kind of have to almost be a generalist in data. Uh, you know, so
I think being able to look at a system, and so if you do have, like, this is the end result, how do I work backward from that end result that we want for the customer or the user, through a series of steps to, like, how can we get the things we need to put into it, and then at each step, like, what are we outputting? I think there's some database skills that transfer to that, and there's also, of course, if you're using RAG, you're using a database, so you need a lot of this back end experience to glue it all together. And I have a theory or a thesis that, like, AI is only useful in a system. Just like human intelligence. Okay, there's some very smart people in the world, but they could just sit and watch TV or like work on something useless. But if you like, the most productive companies and organizations are the ones that have the best systems for getting people to interact with each other and be part of a culture and like follow certain protocols and output, good work, desirable work that people want. And these, like, if you need those to get human intelligence to be productive, you certainly need them for artificial intelligence to be productive. So I think that the system and the glue of how these things are going to fit together will be where a lot of the work goes on, and where humans will stay involved extensively. Because if people are worried about AI, or even if they're not worried, like logically, the last thing we're going to hand off to AI is the managing of itself.
Yeah.
Like, or like, now we're going to let AI design systems for AI. All right. Well, hold on. So I think humans will be building systems that utilize AI for a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, I also think even if it's like, let's say we get into the realm of self-training and recursive improvements and, those, I mean, there's definitely talk about that already. It's not alien to, when we are talking about AI, it's sort of like a human, replica that we're trying to create, right? So, and how much our mind has evolved from the animalistic instincts and the environment that we once were part of, and now we have evolved, highly evolved, and I think that evolution will take place. But like, I'm really like, let's talk about this for a little bit, right? So my opinion on this is, I'm not fearful of this, but knowing what it is helping me understand that, hey, my intelligence is far superior to what this can do. Like, yes, it can automate, yes, it can do a lot of things that I already did in the past, which I happily embrace, because I don't want to be doing those things. Like, I want to be doing more, intellectually demanding things, thinking about more creative, more, out of the box type work, versus like the, for lack of a better word, TPS reports and
Totally.
I think there's like, as engineers, we kind of always like to take the path of least resistance, and if something can be automated, why not? So, what would the future world look like with AI? Like, let's say if it's full blown, and what do you have in mind? I'm curious.
Yeah. I'll say one thing about self-training models is that even though they're training themselves in a very structured system
Of
that
course.
was designed by humans. But I feel similarly to you in the short term, in that I am not afraid of it taking my job as an entrepreneur, or like I can state shift, I can do something valuable. I believe that, especially because I'm working on AI, right? That's a good insurance policy, I suppose. But I do worry about maybe people that don't feel that way, and they are just like, if somebody has a job in support or sales, and those jobs start going away.
Yeah.
It's not just like, oh, I lost my job. It's like, oh, that was something I was good at, and the AI is actually better than me now, and faster and more efficient. And like, I could see people having kind of this existential struggle of self-worth.
Got it.
That makes sense, of like, well, like, what is like a lot of people get fulfillment from their work, whether that's something simple, like, being not simple. I don't want to demean any of this at all.
Yeah.
Like if
Yeah.
you're a mechanic, right? Like you may take pleasure in working cars and fixing stuff. I like to tinker on my motorcycle in the garage, right? If you're a software engineer or an entrepreneur, whatever you do, like hopefully, unless you hate your job, which I feel sorry for you, you should get a different job. But you probably get some fulfillment out of your work. And if AI takes that away, it's kind of the enemy to them, to those people.
What are your thoughts on UBI? Maybe we do need UBI.
What's UBI?
Universal basic income.
Oh, I think that will be a necessity, and that the transition period to getting to that will be bumpy because, unfortunately, it's so strongly associated with like socialism and communism, and it's like there's people super opposed to it. And so the being able to distribute income, because I'm sure AI will concentrate wealth.
Yeah.
With people that have, to business owners that are able to utilize it, right? We may have some time before that really becomes a problem, but
I want to interrupt for a second, just on the concentration of wealth. I wonder if, just kind of AI as like a technological revolution, right? I mean, I think, for example, when we look at the industrial revolution, there were some spikes that happened, like when steam powered, engines came in, then the diesel powered, then, or the diesel or the gasoline powered engines, and then sort of like the control systems, like with the chips, started coming in. So, and then the industrial revolution kind of plateaued, and then we got into more the technological revolution, with mainframes and PCs, and then the third spike was during the mobile, version of it. And then now we've got the AI, which is kind of bumping the technological revolution, one more, it's spiking, it's going to spike at least, going back to your point about that concentration of wealth. I wonder if this might be like a good time for somebody to get in, like, and learn. Like, I think the curious ones and the ones that are learning and wanting to improve can actually, there's an opportunity here, right? That's what I think, and you can make something of it, like, and actually you can create a new world and participate in that new creation, so to speak, because the time is now.
The time is now.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like the very beginning.
Exactly.
It does not matter that NVIDIA is $2 trillion. That does not mean we're at the peak of anything.
Not at all. Hardly.
Yeah. It's like the internet, maybe bigger. And the internet, like, it's not that old, but like when the internet came out and people were starting to use it in the 90s, and then there was a bunch of hype, and then the .com bubble. It's like, that was 24 years ago. And imagine all the things that were created in that time frame.
Right.
So we're going to see so many things that are super cool, not just like next week because everyone's freaking out constantly, but like in 5 years. And so by starting to learn now, you are not too late. You should be starting to learn now, and you may build something amazing like next year, in 2 years. I mean, there's plenty of time right now, but it is an amazing opportunity. It is the opportunity of a lifetime to start some kind of a business or learn how all this stuff works.
Yeah, but I'm very excited about that. Like, personally, for me, even I think about, like, I have kids, and so do you. Like, what sort of world are they going to inherit? So I'm certainly thinking of the future for them. Obviously, we both love our kids, and we don't want them to live in some sort of a disillusioned, sort of like a post-apocalyptic world.
Yeah. You know, one of the problems with us as people is that we're never really satisfied, and we don't really choose the right benchmark to measure ourselves on. So like, I'm okay with some people getting super filthy rich. Like, I'm a capitalist, right? And I think that it will be good for everybody, partly because of taxes and because the government will try to take care of people. So I think like we'll all move forward and we'll be better off. But like, and we're better off than we were 100 years ago. But are we happier? I can't say if we're happier. We're physically better off. We have more food. We have more options, choices, technology. Will we be happier in 100 years when AI does everything for us? There's a chance we'll be super unhappy, because you sort of need fulfilling stuff to do in life. We can't just like sit around and be pampered, or we'll actually become so like, that's why, I mean, like cold plunges, right? It's painful, and
Yeah.
pain is good. And so like, I want to teach my kids to be able to find fulfillment in things and not measure themselves against the wrong measuring stick. Like, oh man, like I'm not as smart as GPT-5 or whatever, like I give up. No, that's not what you do. It doesn't matter if you're the best in the world at something. Like, you, if you do it for the right reasons, then you learn to find enjoyment in it. And like, our brains need that. We need stuff that challenges us and is interesting. So regardless of whether AI is better than you.
Yeah, I mean, that you make a great point. I think I want to, number one, reiterate what you just said. Like, in terms of, the opportunity and the measuring stick that one has to use to, find fulfillment in what you're doing. It doesn't have to be like measured based on, you know obviously financial success is, what a lot of our jobs are associated with. But that can change. You can actually find fulfillment in doing something that you love, because everything else is sort of like potentially taken care of.
Yeah.
So that's one. The second angle to this is, there's like a book I've been reading called Superabundance, and it's written by two professors. I forget the name of the authors. Maybe I'll put it in the show notes. But the idea of, when the industrial, I mean, this is just a quick example. When the industrial revolution happened, candles were the means of illumination,
Mm-hmm.
and they were worried about the number of factories that all these candle making industry is going to explode, and we need to have illumination in the cities, or these kerosene lamps and thing. How do we create a, like this whole thing? And then sort of like this breakthrough of incandescent light, comes along, and literally, like, you don't need those industries for illumination. Like, so in other words, what that book is trying to say is, what we end up with our innovation is we get more time. Like, we get more time to pursue other things, spend time with our loved ones, and spend time with, the things that you actually might have sacrificed, like playing a guitar, or be doing some artwork, or reading a book, or the things that we want to enjoy in life. And maybe that's what we will get back, so to speak. And maybe that'll kind of become more in demand, right? Like, we always talk about like starving artists, and like, unless you're a big artist and well known, highly reputable, that's a different thing. Like, you make a lot of money. But but you know s- typically there's the concept of starving artists, and maybe they kind of become the creative ones, become more in demand. I really think that would be an interesting thing to explore, and how maybe even like a consciousness, like all these mindfulness practice folks, and they're kind of like, that's an industry that's going to also become a little more interesting. Like, how do they evolve, and how do they raise the level of consciousness among people.
Yeah. A lot of people may struggle with just like, what is my meaning? But maybe that's just going to happen sooner for them than later, when they would have figured out like, oh, your job actually, I mean, it can be a source of meaning, right? But like,
Yeah.
I hope for future generations that grow up with AI that this is how they can think of it.
Yeah.
I just, for people that are so like, we have so many things already ingrained in us, like that'll still be a major struggle for a lot of people. On the plus side, they were talking not long ago about a labor shortage because of all the baby boomers retiring.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll have a soft AI landing, and the AI will just kind of fill in the gaps on where the baby boomers are retiring, and nobody will actually be upset. That would be the ideal scenario. And then,
one thing for sure is there is no off switch. Like that much. I mean, like, that's like, as much as like even the latest Elon Musk suing Sam Altman for the Microsoft alliance, like, that's not necessarily going to stop. Like, people are like thinking like, oh, it's going to stop. Like, it's
no.
right. I mean, that's
The Pandora's box has been opened. I mean, it's not like we have, I don't know, people have lay people have the wrong notion about AI.
yeah.
I have a friend who like I respect, and he's really smart, but he was like talking about, what if AI is already on the loose, like doing stuff, and like the new Mission Impossible movie. And I'm like, no, it's not like that. It's not that smart. But it's very, very useful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know.
Like you mentioned Pandora's box, it reminds me of that. Maybe we'll end on this philosophical note. Is Prometheus? The myth of Prometheus is like, he's always whispering innovation in the minds of human beings, and he's one of the titans from the god, like in between men and gods.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's when Zeus gets really mad, like, hey, you're giving innovation to, I mean, it's not like he just gave fire, like we know him historically as, or mythologically as, giving fire to human beings. But actually he was more responsible for innovation, Prometheus. And then his brother, so Prometheus was more strategic in how he was giving innovation. Like, he was like slowly introducing them to like broader thinking and bigger levels of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Versus his brother gives the Pandora's box, and when they open, it's like, it's like a slew of new things that come out, and like, we don't have control over it. So I'm hoping we take the Promethean approach, like, versus, like, I forget the brother's name. It's like a Greek mythological name, but anyway, yeah, it's interesting. Since you mentioned it, it's like,
Thank you. I am not well studied on Greek mythology, but so that's interesting. But I mean, to your point earlier, it is accelerating, and while I think at the current state, it's nothing to be afraid of per se. Like, it is moving so fast, and so many more people are working on, and so much money is more pouring into it, that there could be new breakthroughs any day. And of course, people love to speculate on these things. I tend not to. I'm like, okay, what we have now, I could be good with for like 10 years. I think that like all businesses could spend the next 10 years implementing what we have now, and we'll see economic and productivity gains across the board every single year from that. So any breakthroughs at this point are just icing on the cake, or maybe like extra cakes on the cake, like like just overload.
Yeah.
So that's how I kind of look at it.
Yeah, it's very interesting time indeed. Like lots of learning to do, lots of exploring, discovery, inner reflection, and so many different things. What motorcycle do you ride?
I have a KTM 300 XCW. It's a two-stroke dirt bike,
Nice,
road bike. I just got it made street legal yesterday at the DMV.
nice.
So,
Yeah, I ride a Ducati Scrambler. So
oh, awesome.
yeah, no, it's more urban riding. I think
Mhm.
it's cafe racer style, and it's fun to go canyon riding, and
That's sweet.
maybe we should ride around town sometime. Maybe go to the AI meetups in our motorcycle.
Yeah, let's start the motorcycle little parking square. I have a little side hustle on top of my
Yeah.
businesses that's called Moto Coffee Co. And it's motocoffee.com. And we're
Okay.
a motorcycle themed coffee company.
No way.
Check it out.
Definitely, we should.
I'll get
I
you.
will check it out. Like this is very interesting. Mark, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm gonna end the stream. Just stick
Awesome.
around.
Thanks so much, David.